As the shadowy figure tapped on the window, an icy fear gripped me, and I realized we had to leave the motel immediately, but the receptionist's vacant eyes still haunt my memories. During a road trip through the countryside, my friends and I found ourselves exhausted and in need of a place to stay for the night. We drove for miles without seeing any signs of civilization until we stumbled upon a small roadside motel. It looked a bit old and run down, but our tiredness won over our initial apprehensions. We walked into the dimly lit lobby and were greeted by a strange man behind the counter. He had a vacant look in his eyes, barely acknowledging our presence as he handed us the room keys without any trouble. Despite the eerie atmosphere, we were too tired to care and headed to our rooms, eager for some rest. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of tapping on the window. My heart raced as I strained to listen, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or a tree branch. But the tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. I felt a chill run down my spine as I slowly turned to look. Standing outside the window was a shadowy figure, motionless and watching me. Its presence was unnerving, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The figure's features were obscured by the darkness, but its intent gaze pierced through the glass, making my skin crawl. I couldn't stay in the room any longer. Fear gripping me, I ran out of the room and headed to my friends' rooms. My heart pounded in my chest as I knocked frantically on their doors, needing to know if they had seen the same figure. As my friends opened their doors, their expressions mirrored my own fear and confusion. Each of them reported seeing the same shadowy figure outside their windows. The realization that we were all experiencing the same terror sent waves of panic through us. It was as if the figure was haunting each of us individually, watching and waiting. We huddled together in the hallway, our fear palpable. The air felt thick with tension, and every small noise made us jump. We knew we couldn't stay in the motel any longer. The shadowy figure had shattered any sense of safety we might have had. We decided to leave immediately, not willing to wait until morning. The urgency to escape was overwhelming, and we quickly packed our bags, trying to ignore the feeling that we were being watched. With our bags in hand, we made our way to the lobby to return the keys. The eerie silence of the motel was unsettling, and the dim lighting only added to the sense of dread. As we approached the front desk, we saw the receptionist fast asleep behind the counter, his vacant eyes closed. We hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to wake him or not. The whole situation felt surreal, as if we were trapped in a nightmare. In the end, we decided not to disturb him and left the keys on the counter. Our fear was too great to risk any more strange encounters. We hurried to our car, the shadowy figure's image still fresh in our minds. The thought of staying another minute in that motel was unbearable. We piled into the car and drove away, the tension in the car thick as we tried to make sense of what had just happened. As we sped away from the motel, the car was filled with an eerie silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. The shadows cast by the passing trees seemed to move and twist unnaturally, reminding us of the figure we had seen. My friends and I exchanged nervous glances, trying to process the fear and confusion that still lingered. The rain began to pour, making the drive even more tense. The rhythmic sound of the wipers seemed to mimic the tapping on the windows we had heard earlier. The fear was palpable, and every bump in the road made us jump. We drove in silence, the only sound being the rain and our own racing hearts. After what felt like hours, we found a small diner that was still open and decided to stop. The warmth and light of the diner were a welcome relief, but the fear and unease remained. We sat at a booth, huddled together, and tried to make sense of the night's events. The next morning, as we were driving again, the car radio crackled to life with a news broadcast. We listened intently, hoping for a distraction from the previous night's terror. The announcer's voice was calm, but what he said sent chills down our spines. He reported that the roadside motel we had stayed at had been abandoned for years. Locals claimed that the place was haunted, and no one had worked there in a long time. The receptionist we had seen was a mystery, as was the shadowy figure that had terrorized us. The news confirmed our worst fears. that we had experienced something supernatural. The car was filled with a tense silence once more. We were all trying to process the shock and realization that the motel was supposed to be abandoned. The reality of our experience was hard to grasp, and it left us with more questions than answers. After hearing the news, we decided to continue our trip, but the mood had changed. The fear and confusion from the previous night still lingered, casting a shadow over our journey. We tried to avoid talking about the motel, but it was always on our minds. Each of us dealt with the fear in our own way. Some tried to rationalize it, while others avoided thinking about it altogether. The experience had bonded us in a strange way, but it also left us with a sense of unease that was hard to shake. The shadowy figure in the eerie motel had left a lasting impression. We agreed to never speak of the night again, hoping that would help us move on. But the fear was always there, lurking in the back of our minds. The memory of the shadowy figure and the abandoned motel haunted us, making it difficult to fully enjoy the rest of our trip. Curiosity eventually got the better of me, and I decided to research the motel's history. What I found was unsettling. The motel had a reputation for strange occurrences and eerie sightings. There were numerous reports of shadowy figures and unexplained noises, similar to what we had experienced. I discovered that the motel had been abandoned after a series of mysterious deaths. The locals believed it was cursed, and many refused to go near it. The more I read, the more I realized that our experience was not unique. Others had encountered the same shadowy figure and had been similarly terrified. The research confirmed what we had felt, that the motel was not just an old building but a place with a dark and sinister history. The fear and unease we had experienced were shared by many others, making it clear that the motel was truly haunted. The mystery of the shadowy figure and the abandoned motel remains unresolved. Despite my research, I could not find any definitive answers about the identity of the figure or the strange receptionist. The lack of closure only deepened my fear and curiosity. The experience had a lasting impact on me and my friends. We avoided talking about it, but the memory was always there, a constant reminder of the unknown dangers lurking in the world. The fear of encountering something similar again haunted us, making us wary of unfamiliar places. Even now, the thought of the motel sends chills down my spine. The shadowy figure and the eerie receptionist are long gone, but their echo remains, a haunting reminder of the night we faced the unknown. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the night we encountered the presence in the abandoned motel. Ready for another dose of fear? Stay tuned for the next terrifying story. Subscribe and tell us which story scared you the most. Story 2. As I sped away from the rest area, the eerie smile of the man who had tapped on my window still haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something sinister. Driving alone at night can be both peaceful and exhausting. On this particular night, I had been on the road for hours, the monotonous hum of the engine lulling me into a state of drowsiness. The long stretch of highway seemed never-ending, and my eyelids grew heavier with each passing mile. When I saw a sign for a rest area up ahead, I decided to pull over and take a short nap. The area was dark and empty, but I was too tired to care. I parked my car, locked the doors, and reclined my seat, hoping a brief rest would refresh me enough to continue my journey. I must have dozed off for only a few minutes when I was abruptly awakened by a tapping sound on the car window. Groggy and disoriented, I sat up and looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. The tapping continued, persistent and unnerving. When I turned to the window, my heart skipped a beat. A man was standing there, his face partially illuminated by the faint light from the rest area lamps. He had a disturbing smile on his face, one that sent chills down my spine. His eyes were fixed on me, and I felt an immediate sense of unease. The man knocked again, and I reluctantly rolled down the window just a crack. He leaned in, his smile never wavering, and asked for help. He claimed that his car had broken down and he needed assistance. His voice was calm, but there was something off about his demeanor that made me wary. I wanted to help, but my instincts told me something was wrong. His behavior was too strange, his smile too unsettling. I apologized and told him I couldn't help, offering a weak excuse about needing to get back on the road. His expression darkened slightly, but he didn't argue. As I rolled up the window and started the car, I glanced at the man one last time. He was still watching me, his smile fading into a blank, emotionless stare. The sense of dread intensified, and I knew I had to leave immediately. I pulled out of the parking spot and drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. In the rearview mirror, I saw the man standing in the same spot, watching as I drove off. His figure grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the darkness. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something dangerous. The relief of leaving the rest area was mixed with a lingering fear that stayed with me for the rest of the drive. When I finally reached the next town, the lights of civilization were a welcome sight. My nerves were still frayed from the encounter at the rest area, and I desperately needed to calm down. I pulled into the parking lot of a convenience store, deciding to take a break and maybe get some advice or reassurance from someone. I walked into the store, the fluorescent lights feeling harsh after the darkness of the road. The clerk behind the counter greeted me with a nod, and I approached, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I recounted my experience at the rest area, hoping to hear that it was just a harmless encounter and that my fears were unfounded. As I finished my story, the clerk's expression changed from curiosity to concern. He leaned in closer and lowered his voice. "You're lucky you got out of there," he said. "There have been several reports of people going missing at that rest area over the past few weeks. Nobody knows what's happening, but it's not safe to stop there at night." His words sent a chill down my spine. The realization that I had narrowly avoided becoming another statistic was both terrifying and sobering. I thanked the clerk for the information, feeling a mix of gratitude and fear. The rest area, once just a spot on the map, now seemed like a place of dark and hidden dangers. The rest of my journey was uneventful, but the encounter at the rest area and the clerk's warning stayed with me. Every shadow on the road, every flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision, made me jump. The fear had taken root, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in the safety of my car. When I finally reached my destination, I shared my experience with my friends and family. They listened with a mix of disbelief and concern, their reassurances doing little to ease my mind. The stranger's unsettling smile and the clerk's warning played over and over in my head, a constant reminder of the danger I had narrowly escaped. From that day on, I made a promise to myself. I would never stop at a rest area at night again. The fear and unease had become a part of me, a constant companion on my travels. The open road, once a source of freedom and adventure, now felt like a place where unseen threats lurked just beyond the reach of my headlights. The experience changed me in ways I hadn't expected. I found myself becoming more cautious, more aware of my surroundings, especially when traveling alone. The trust one once had in the safety of nighttime stops was shattered, replaced by a heightened sense of vigilance. Every time I drove at night, the memory of the stranger at the rest area resurfaced. The fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, making me second-guess every decision. The open road was no longer a place of solace, but a gauntlet of potential dangers that I had to navigate with care. I also began to notice how the incident affected my interactions with strangers. The friendly, easygoing demeanor I once had was replaced with suspicion and wariness. The world felt a little less safe, a little more unpredictable, and the trust one had in others was harder to come by. Despite my efforts to move on, the mystery of the stranger on the road remained unresolved. Who was he? What were his intentions? And what happened to the people who had gone missing at that rest area? These questions haunted me, their answers just out of reach, adding to the unease that had settled in my mind. The fear and curiosity intertwined, creating a complex web of emotions that I couldn't untangle. The encounter had left a lasting impact on me, a reminder of the unknown dangers that can appear when least expected. The rest area, the stranger, and the missing people became a dark chapter in my life, a story that I would carry with me forever. Even now, the thought of that night sends chills down my spine. The stranger's disturbing smile and the sense of narrowly escaping a sinister fate are long gone, but their echo remains, a haunting reminder of the night I faced the unknown. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant companion on every journey I take. Feeling scared yet? Hold on tight, the next horror awaits. Hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. Story 3. As the trucker approached my window with a sinister look, my instinct screamed at me to get out of there, and I sped away, narrowly escaping a potential danger. It was a long, lonely stretch of highway, and I was traveling alone on a routine business trip. The road was quiet, and the hum of the engine combined with the endless line of asphalt was almost hypnotic. I enjoyed the solitude and the opportunity to gather my thoughts. The sun had set, and darkness enveloped the landscape. The occasional headlights of passing cars were the only interruptions in an otherwise uneventful drive. I had done this route many times before and felt comfortable and at ease, unaware of the danger that was about to unfold. As I drove, I noticed a truck behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it, but as time passed, I realized it was following me too closely. No matter how fast I went or which lanes I changed, the truck stayed right behind me. My initial calm began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of unease. I glanced in my rearview mirror, seeing the truck's headlights looming large. The persistent presence of the truck started to make me nervous. The isolation of the highway, combined with the truck's unwavering pursuit, heightened my anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The trucker's behavior became more aggressive. He started flashing his lights and honking his horn persistently. The blinding flashes and deafening honks added to my fear and confusion. What did he want? Why was he so insistent? I tried to stay calm and rational, telling myself that maybe he just needed help. But the aggressive manner in which he was trying to get my attention made me doubt that possibility. My heart raced as I decided to pull over, hoping to quickly resolve whatever issue had caused this disturbance. As I pulled over to the side of the road, the truck followed suit. I rolled down my window just a bit, enough to hear but not enough to be vulnerable. The trucker got out and walked toward me. He was a large man with a grim expression, and his eyes seemed to bore into me. He leaned in and said he needed help loading something onto his truck. His tone was not just urgent, but also menacing. Every instinct in my body screamed at me that this was not safe. The way he looked at me, the way he spoke, everything about him set off alarms in my head. My intuition told me to leave immediately. I politely declined his request, my voice trembling, and quickly rolled up the window. His expression darkened, but I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I put the car in gear and sped away, my heart pounding with fear. As I sped away, my heart was pounding and my hands were shaking. The truck continued to follow me for a while, its headlights glaring in my rearview mirror. The fear and adrenaline surged through my veins, making every second feel like an eternity. I kept glancing back, praying that the truck would eventually give up the chase. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the truck began to fall back. I kept driving, not daring to slow down until I was sure I had put enough distance between us. The relief was immense, but the fear lingered. The aggressive trucker and his menacing behavior had shaken me to my core. When I was certain I was no longer being followed, I pulled into a well-lit gas station to collect myself. I took deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. The reality of how close I had come to potential danger hit me hard, and I was grateful for the instincts that had urged me to flee. I reached my destination later that night, exhausted but relieved to be safe. I checked into my hotel and tried to put the encounter behind me, but the fear and unease lingered. I decided to unwind by watching some TV, hoping to distract myself from the night's events. As I flipped through the channels, a news report caught my attention. The anchor was talking about a series of highway attacks in the area, and my blood ran cold when they mentioned a trucker who was wanted for questioning. The description matched the man I had encountered, right down to his menacing demeanor and the aggressive behavior. The realization that I had narrowly escaped a dangerous situation was both terrifying and sobering. I felt a mix of relief and fear, knowing that my instincts had likely saved me from harm. The news report confirmed my worst fears and left me shaken. The next morning, I reflected on the previous night's events and the importance of following my intuition. The encounter with the sinister trucker had reinforced the value of trusting my gut feelings, especially in potentially dangerous situations. I couldn't help but think about what might have happened if I had ignored my instincts and stayed to help the trucker. The fear and adrenaline from the encounter stayed with me, making me more cautious and vigilant. I realized how easily I could have become another victim in the news report. The experience had changed me, instilling a new level of awareness and caution in my everyday life. I decided to share my story with friends and family, hoping it would serve as a reminder to always trust their instincts. The relief of having avoided danger was tempered by the knowledge that others might not have been so lucky. The encounter left a lasting impact on my sense of safety and trust. The encounter with the sinister trucker had a lasting effect on me. I found myself becoming more wary and cautious, especially when traveling alone. The open road, once a source of freedom and adventure, now felt like a place where unseen dangers lurked just out of sight. Every time I drove at night, the memory of the trucker's menacing smile and the fear I felt resurfaced. The vigilance that the encounter had instilled in me became a constant companion. I checked my rearview mirror more often, stayed alert to my surroundings, and avoided stopping at isolated rest areas or truck stops. The fear of encountering another sinister trucker or dangerous situation made me more cautious in my interactions with strangers. The trust one once had in the safety of the open road was shattered, replaced by a sense of vulnerability and awareness of the potential threats that could arise. Despite the relief of having escaped, the mystery of the sinister trucker remained unresolved. Who was he, and what were his intentions? The news reports mentioned a series of attacks, but I never found out if he was caught or if the attacks continued. The lack of closure left me with lingering questions and fears. The experience had a profound impact on my perception of highway travel. The shadow of that night's encounter loomed over every trip I took, a constant reminder of the unknown dangers that could arise at any moment. The fear and unease became part of my journey, influencing every decision and interaction on the road. Even now, the thought of that night sends chills down my spine. The sinister trucker and the narrow escape from danger are long gone, but their echo remains, a haunting reminder of the night I faced the unknown. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant companion on every journey I take. Story 4. As the woman in white screamed from the back seat, my brother and I jumped out of the car in sheer terror, only to look back and find her vanished into thin air. It was a long drive back home after a weekend trip, and my brother and I were eager to reach our destination. To save time, we decided to take a shortcut through a rarely used rural road. The night was pitch black, and the road was flanked by vast open fields that stretched out endlessly. The drive was peaceful at first, with only the sound of the car engine and the occasional hoot of an owl breaking the silence. We chatted and laughed, trying to keep ourselves awake and alert. The isolation of the road made us feel like we were the only two people in the world. As we drove deeper into the countryside, a sudden movement ahead caught our attention. There, standing in the middle of the road, was a woman dressed in a flowing white gown. We stopped the car abruptly, tires screeching on the asphalt. The headlights illuminated her figure, and she appeared almost ethereal, glowing in the dark. We got out of the car, concern and curiosity driving us to check if she was okay. But as we approached, she seemed to evaporate into the night air, leaving no trace behind. Our confusion turned to unease as we searched the area around but found nothing. No footsteps, no sign of anyone having been there. After several minutes of futile searching, we reluctantly returned to the car. The eerie silence of the night now felt oppressive, and a sense of dread hung in the air. We tried to shake off the strange encounter as a trick of the mind, perhaps a hallucination born from exhaustion. As I turned the key in the ignition and the engine roared to life, we both heard a blood-curdling scream. I turned around to see the woman in white sitting in the back seat, her mouth open in a silent wail. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she seemed to be pleading for help. Panic overtook us, and we jumped out of the car, our hearts racing. The scream had stopped abruptly, and when we looked back, the back seat was empty. The woman had vanished just as mysteriously as she had appeared. We stood there, shaking and breathless, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The fear and confusion were overwhelming. We knew we couldn't stay there any longer. Without another word, we got back into the car and sped away, our minds reeling from the encounter. The drive to the nearest town was a blur, every shadow and movement causing us to jump. When we finally reached the safety of a nearby town, we headed straight to a local diner, hoping to calm our nerves with some hot coffee and to find some answers. The warmth and light of the diner were a stark contrast to the dark, eerie road we had just left behind. As we sat down, we decided to share our experience with the waitress, hoping she might know something. The waitress listened intently, her eyes widening with each detail. When we finished, she called over an older gentleman who had been sitting at the counter. "You need to tell them what you know," she said. The man introduced himself as a longtime resident of the area and began to tell us about the legend of the woman in white. According to the local legend, the woman we had seen was a ghost. She had died in a car accident on that very road many years ago. Ever since then, people had reported seeing her apparition, always in distress, always disappearing without a trace. The man said that she was searching for help, trying to find peace, but was forever trapped in her tragic fate. The story sent chills down our spines. It was both terrifying and heartbreaking. We realized that what we had experienced was not just a figment of our imagination, but a ghostly encounter with a tormented soul. The revelation left us in a state of shock, the fear and mystery of the night magnified by the man's words. The encounter with the woman in white had shaken us deeply. As we finished our coffee, we made a pact to never take that shortcut again. The rural road, once seen as a mere convenience, was now a place of dread and haunted memories. We decided it was best to stick to well-traveled paths in the future, avoiding any potential supernatural encounters. The decision brought a small measure of comfort, but the fear and unease lingered. We couldn't forget the woman's anguished face and the chilling scream that had filled the car. The memory of that night stayed with us, a constant reminder of the unknown dangers that lurked in the darkness. In the weeks that followed, the encounter with the woman in white continued to haunt us. Every time we drove at night, especially on rural roads, we felt a heightened sense of anxiety. The fear of seeing her again, or encountering something else equally terrifying, was always in the back of our minds. Our nightly drives were now filled with vigilance, every shadow and flicker of movement scrutinized with suspicion. The open road, once a place of freedom, had become a landscape of potential threats. The experience had altered our perception of nighttime travel, instilling a deep-seated fear that was hard to shake. Despite our best efforts to move on, the mystery of the woman in the field remained unresolved. We often wondered who she had been, what had led to her tragic death, and why she continued to appear to travelers on that lonely road. The lack of answers only deepened our sense of unease. The experience had left a lasting impact on us, changing the way we viewed the world around us. The fear and curiosity intertwined, creating a complex web of emotions that we couldn't untangle. The encounter had become a dark chapter in our lives, a story that we would carry with us forever. Even now, the thought of that night sends chills down my spine. The woman in white, her anguished scream, and the eerie disappearance are long gone, but their echo remains. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the night we faced the unknown. The unresolved mystery of the woman in the field continues to haunt us, a reminder that some things are beyond our understanding. Story 5. as the cabin doors slammed open and shadowy figures appeared outside. We knew we had to escape immediately or face something terrifyingly unknown. During a spontaneous road trip with my friends, we decided to take a detour and explore a dirt road that led deep into a forested area. The winding path and towering trees added a sense of adventure to our journey. After a few miles, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin that piqued our curiosity. The cabin looked like it had been deserted for years, with its weathered wood and overgrown surroundings. Despite its eerie appearance, we were intrigued and decided to investigate. We parked the car and made our way inside, eager to see what secrets the cabin held. As we stepped inside the cabin, we were surprised to find evidence that someone had been there recently. There were fresh food items on the table, clothes neatly folded on a chair, and a sense of recent habitation in the air. The discovery made us uneasy, but our curiosity pushed us to explore further. In one corner of the cabin, we found an old, leather-bound diary. Flipping through its pages, we read disturbing accounts of someone claiming to be pursued by shadows. The entries detailed a growing sense of fear and paranoia, with the writer describing encounters with dark, shadowy figures that seemed to follow them everywhere. The atmosphere inside the cabin grew tense as we read the diary. The more we learned about the mysterious shadows, the more we felt an ominous presence around us. It was as if the cabin itself was alive with the writer's fear, and we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we continued reading the diary, the tension in the cabin became almost palpable. The eerie silence was broken only by the sound of our own breathing and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. The entries in the diary became increasingly frantic, describing desperate attempts to escape the ever-present shadows. We began to feel a growing sense of unease, as if the shadows the writer described were not just figments of their imagination. The cabin's dark corners seemed to hide unseen watchers, and we couldn't ignore the feeling that we were no longer alone. The diary's chilling words echoed in our minds, amplifying our fear. Suddenly, we heard footsteps outside the cabin, growing closer and more ominous. The sound sent shivers down our spines, and we exchanged frightened glances. The realization that we might be facing the same terror that had haunted the diary's writer filled us with dread. We knew we had to leave, but fear paralyzed us momentarily. The tension reached its peak when the cabin door slammed open with a force that made us jump. Standing in the doorway were shadowy figures, their forms indistinct but undeniably menacing. The sight of them sent us into a panic, and we knew we had to flee immediately. We bolted out of the cabin, our hearts pounding with terror. The shadowy figures seemed to move closer, their presence almost tangible in the darkness. We didn't dare look back as we ran towards the car, the sense of impending danger driving us forward. Reaching the car, we scrambled inside and locked the doors. The engine roared to life, and we sped away from the cabin, the shadowy figures disappearing into the night behind us. The fear and adrenaline surged through our veins, making every second feel like a desperate race for survival. As we sped away from the cabin, the shadowy figures seemed to fade into the distance, but our fear remained palpable. My hands shook on the steering wheel, and my friends were eerily silent, each of us processing what had just happened. The eerie image of the figures standing in the doorway played over and over in my mind. We drove for what felt like hours, not daring to stop until we were well away from the forest. The tension in the car was thick, with everyone occasionally glancing back, half expecting the figures to reappear. It wasn't until we reached a well-lit gas station that we finally felt a semblance of safety. As we parked and got out of the car, the relief was immense, but the fear lingered. We exchanged nervous looks, still trying to wrap our minds around the night's events. The reality of how close we had come to something sinister was both sobering and terrifying. After gathering our composure, we sat down at a nearby diner to discuss what had happened. Over cups of hot coffee, we tried to make sense of the encounter. The diary's accounts of the shadows and our own experience seemed too coincidental to ignore. We realized how lucky we were to have escaped unscathed. The more we talked, the more we understood the gravity of our situation. We had ventured into a place we didn't understand, and the consequences could have been dire. The realization of what might have happened if we had stayed longer sent chills down our spines. We made a collective decision to avoid exploring deserted places in the future. The thrill of adventure was not worth the potential danger we had faced. The encounter had changed our perspective, making us more cautious and aware of the risks that come with curiosity. In the weeks following our escape from the cabin, the fear and unease stayed with us. Nighttime drives, which had once been enjoyable, were now filled with anxiety. Every shadow and flicker of movement made us jump, and the memory of the shadowy figures haunted our dreams. The experience left a lasting impact, especially on me. I found myself constantly on edge, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The once thrilling idea of exploring unknown places now filled me with dread. The fear of encountering something sinister again was always in the back of my mind. Our group dynamics changed as well. Conversations frequently turned to that night, each retelling reinforcing the fear and caution we felt. The cabin had become a symbol of danger and the unknown, a reminder that some places are best left unexplored. Despite our decision to avoid the cabin, the mystery of what we had encountered lingered. We often wondered about the identity of the person who had written the diary and the nature of the shadows that pursued them. The lack of answers only deepened our unease. We considered returning to the cabin to find more clues, but ultimately decided against it. The risk was too great, and the fear too real. The questions remained unanswered, adding to the sense of mystery and fear surrounding the cabin and its recent occupant. The unresolved nature of the encounter left us with a sense of unfinished business. The shadowy figures and the diary's chilling accounts became a frequent topic of conversation, each discussion filled with speculation and fear. The mystery of the cabin in the woods was something we would carry with us forever. The experience at the cabin fundamentally changed our approach to adventure and curiosity. What had once been a fun and exciting pursuit now felt fraught with potential danger. The fear and caution instilled by that night stayed with us, influencing our decisions and interactions. The cabin in the woods became a cautionary tale among our friends, a reminder of the night we faced the unknown and barely escaped. The fear and uncertainty of that encounter left a lasting mark on us all, shaping our perception of the world and the hidden dangers it might hold. Even now, the thought of that night sends chills down my spine. The shadowy figures, the diary, and the terror we felt are long gone, but their echo remains. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the night we faced the unknown and the lasting impact it had on our lives. Another story, another scream. Get ready for the next terrifying tale. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us which story gave you chills. Story 6. As the creature's glowing eyes locked onto mine and it charged, I barely managed to scramble back into the car, feeling the car shake as it slammed against the door. It was a dark and lonely night as I drove along a deserted road, making my way home after a late shift at work. The isolation of the road and the enveloping darkness made the drive feel endless. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I had taken this road many times before, but that night, something felt different. There was an eerie stillness in the air, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Little did I know, this drive would turn into a nightmarish encounter that I would never forget. As I rounded a bend, my headlights illuminated a large, furry creature crossing the road ahead. I slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to an abrupt halt. My heart raced as I tried to comprehend what I had just seen. The creature was unlike anything I had ever encountered before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to get out and check. I stepped out of the car, the night air cool against my skin. As I moved closer to the spot where the creature had disappeared, I heard a low, menacing growl coming from the bushes. I froze, my eyes straining to see through the darkness. Suddenly, a pair of glowing eyes emerged from the shadows, watching me intently. The sight sent a shiver down my spine. and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The creature seemed to be assessing me, deciding whether I was a threat or prey. Without warning, the creature charged at me with a speed and ferocity that took my breath away. I turned and ran back to the car, my heart pounding in my chest. I barely managed to dive back into the driver's seat and slam the door shut, locking it just in time. The creature hit the car with a force that rocked the vehicle, leaving deep scratches on the paint. I could hear its growls and snarls as it continued to attack, trying to get inside. The fear was overwhelming, and I struggled to keep my hands steady on the steering wheel. I quickly started the engine and put the car in gear, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. The creature's glowing eyes and fierce growls were burned into my memory as I sped away, desperate to put as much distance between us as possible. With the car now in motion, I pressed the accelerator to the floor, speeding down the deserted road. The creature chased after me for a short distance, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. The fear and adrenaline drove me forward, my heart pounding with every passing second. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw the creature gradually fall back, eventually disappearing into the shadows. Relief washed over me, but the terror still gripped my mind. I didn't slow down until I was sure I was far away from the encounter. When I finally felt safe enough to stop, I pulled over to the side of the road and took a moment to catch my breath. My hands were trembling, and my mind was racing with questions. What was that creature? Where had it come from? And why had it attacked me? Arriving home, I was still shaken and could hardly believe what had happened. I parked the car and rushed inside, locking the door behind me. My heart was still pounding, and every shadow seemed to hide unseen dangers. I spent the night restlessly, unable to shake the image of those glowing eyes and the creature's fierce attack. The next morning, I gathered enough courage to inspect the car in daylight. My breath caught as I saw deep claw marks etched into the paint, a tangible reminder of the terrifying encounter. The sight confirmed that it wasn't a nightmare or a trick of the light. The creature was real. The reality of what had happened weighed heavily on me. I knew I had to tell someone, but how could I explain something so unbelievable? The claw marks were proof, but the fear and confusion left me struggling to find the right words. Later that day, I shared my experience with friends and family, hoping for some reassurance or explanation. Their reactions ranged from skepticism to fear. Some suggested it might have been a wild animal, while others speculated about urban legends and cryptids. Each theory only added to my unease. Desperate for answers, I searched online for similar encounters. I found stories of unexplained sightings and mysterious creatures, but none matched what I had seen. The lack of concrete answers left me feeling more unsettled. The fear of the unknown gnawed at me, and I realized that I might never fully understand what had happened. The absence of a clear explanation meant that the memory of the encounter lingered in my mind, always lurking in the background. The glowing eyes and the creature's ferocity were seared into my memory, making it difficult to move past the fear. The encounter left a lasting impact on me, affecting my sense of safety and security. Every time I drove, especially at night, I felt a heightened sense of anxiety. The fear of seeing those glowing eyes again or encountering another unknown danger was always present. Future drives became exercises in vigilance. I found myself constantly scanning the road and the surrounding area, alert to every movement and shadow. The open road, once a place of freedom and solitude, had become a source of potential threats and fear. The encounter had changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The sense of adventure and curiosity I once had was now tempered by caution and apprehension. The memory of the creature and the fear it inspired were never far from my thoughts, influencing my actions and decisions. Despite my efforts to find answers, the mystery of the creature remained unresolved. I often wondered about its identity and nature. Was it a wild animal, a supernatural entity, or something else entirely? The lack of closure only deepened my sense of unease. Occasional news reports of similar sightings kept the fear alive. Each new story added to the mystery and reminded me of my own encounter. The unresolved nature of the experience left me with a sense of unfinished business, as if I needed to find answers to truly move on. The questions and fears lingered, making it difficult to put the encounter behind me. The mystery of the creature became a part of my life, a shadow that followed me, always reminding me of the night I faced the unknown. The experience fundamentally changed my perspective on nighttime travel and the unknown. The fear and caution instilled by that night stayed with me, influencing my behavior and decisions. I became more aware of the potential dangers that lurked in the darkness. The creature on the road became a haunting memory, a reminder of the unknown dangers that exist beyond the reach of understanding. The fear and vulnerability I felt during the encounter were always with me, shaping my actions and thoughts. Even now, the memory of that night sends chills down my spine. The glowing eyes, the fierce growls, and the desperate escape are long gone, but their echo remains. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the night I faced the unknown and the lasting impact it had on my life.